My ex always hated our dog, but he probably would have taken her too if she weren't so ugly. If Lulu were one of those cute mini golden doodles or corgis, or even one of those goofy looking dogs that are charming in their ugliness, think Danny DeVito or Steve Buscemi, only in dog version, then I have no doubt he would have claimed ownership of her too, along with everything else in our apartment. But Lulu is just a plain old ugly dog, and for that and so much else about her, I'm forever grateful. I don't want to talk about my ex too much here, because this isn't about him, but I do need to explain why I was traveling across the country in the middle of the night with my few worldly possessions loaded up in the back of a bumpy U-Haul van. My ex and I had been together 6 years, never married. He said marriage was outdated, and I said fine. Was I upset by that? Yes and no. Well, yes. But I kept quiet. I loved him. 5 months ago he tells me he wants to split up. He said it just like that. I want to split up. No shaking of the hands, no tears in his eyes, not even a change in the tone of his voice. I was in the kitchen when it happened, eating honey bunches of oats for breakfast. He was standing in the hall. I want to split up, he said, and then he grabbed his bag and left for work, leaving me to sob as my cereal got soggy in the bowl. Lulu heard me crying and nuzzled her snout in my lap. She whimpered along with me as the hours went by. I skipped work that day, sat on the couch and watched the sunlight pass over the walls of the apartment I'd always thought of as our home together. The thing is, my ex made way more money than me. He was happy to cover the bulk of the rent, he'd said. Happy to buy the furniture. Happy to lease the new car for us. Happy to pay for this and that, loading up our apartment with nice things. When the time came for me to move all the things that were actually mine out of the place, I realized I had even less than I did 6 years ago. It all barely filled the U-Haul van. I didn't have a couch or chairs. Those were on his paper. I didn't have any dishes or silverware. We'd thrown out my old ones when he'd bought a fancy new set a couple of years ago. I didn't even have a mattress. He'd gotten us an expensive memory foam king size. I remember I'd always wanted to let Lulu hop up on that bed to snuggle while we watched movies in our room. My ex wouldn't hear it. Stop treating the dog like it's a person, he'd said. She's lucky she gets to live inside the apartment with us. I was the one who got Lulu from the pound, back when she was a puppy. She's a street dog, or she was, until the people from animal control swept her up one day as she'd been rummaging through an overturned trash can. You can tell she's got a good amount of pit bull in her. But beyond that, she's an all-American mutt with a big boulder of a head, a weirdly thin body and stumpy legs. She waddles more than she walks, and she snores like crazy. But she's a total sweetheart. When she sees kids, she lies on her belly and waits until they get close before she gives them kisses. We didn't even train her to do that. One afternoon about a year or so ago, Lulu came up behind my ex and licked his ankles, and he turned and gave her a small kick right in the head. It wasn't enough to hurt Lulu, but that was when I should have known. Looking back, it's amazing how much you can convince yourself someone is who they're not. So, the U-Haul was packed. I'd quit my hourly job, and I was now on the road toward my sister's place in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where I'd been promised a place to stay for the time being. It was a 10-plus hour drive, just Lulu and me in the front of the van as we rumbled through the endless pastoral of farmland and cow towns. I'd purposefully decided to take the smaller highway to avoid traffic, since I was still uncomfortable driving the U-Haul, and the scenery made me glad I did. Tall fast food signs rose up into the sky like totem poles against clouds so big and white, they almost made you want to cry. But I'd promised myself I was done crying, or at least until I'd gotten off the road. I'd had to pack the U-Haul by myself, so it had already been early afternoon by the time I set off. After about 4 hours on the road, the sky began to dim over the highway. Just as the sun sunk beneath the ridges of the mountains in the distance, I heard a loud clang somewhere below my feet. All at once, the U-Haul van started shaking. It felt like the wheel was fighting against me. I kept having to grip it and yank it back straight. I had trouble seeing out the back window because my stuff was piled up, but I managed to get over to an exit that was just ahead. As I slowed the van down now that I was off the highway, I saw a sign sticking out from the roadway. Richard and Sons Auto Repair. A quarter mile ahead. I know you've probably heard a story like this before. A story where a car breaks down in the middle of nowhere on a backroads highway. A young woman by herself. Maybe she meets a creepy guy in overalls who says something like, "Well, you must be lost, little missy," as he eyes her like she's a good meal he's about to devour. But it really wasn't like that. "Evening, ma'am," said the perfectly normal-looking guy inside the auto repair shop. "How can I help you?" "Oh, and who's this cutie?" he added, taking notice of Lulu at my side. The shop's owner was a man named Richard Meadows, and he was a pleasant, polite, and well-dressed older gentleman, his gray hair neatly combed and his buttoned shirt starched bright white. He ran the place with his 2 sons, both of whom were waiting in the garage. "My sons Abel and Dean will run diagnostics. Then you and I can head into the office to call the U-Haul folks," Richard said as we walked up to them. "Don't want this to be on your tab after all. Abel, want to take the keys?" I handed the keys to the son named Abel, who was a little chubby and pale, his shaved head dotted with moles. He seemed shy and only nodded when he took the keys from me. I only mentioned Abel's appearance because the other son beside him, Dean, was almost shockingly handsome. He had a thick head of sandy blonde hair, a chiseled jawline, and broad shoulders under his denim work shirt. He was that level of teen movie heartthrob handsome that made my face suddenly hot. Walking with me out to the U-Haul in the lot, Dean took out a clipboard, licking the tip of the pen as he angled it downward. "So, the truck just started rattling on you?" he asked. I stuttered through what had happened, feeling like a nervous high school girl again. But he just smiled and nodded the whole time, his voice calm like a doctor at a bedside. Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out. And like my dad said, don't worry, we'll make sure the U-Haul folks pay up, not you." I thanked him, trying to ignore the fact that I was blushing for no reason. "Good thing you've got a bodyguard here with you," Dean added, smiling down at Lulu. "What's his name?" "Her," I said, "and her name is Lulu." "Well, hi there, Lulu." When he reached down to pet her, Lulu stepped back and showed her teeth, growling under her breath. "Lulu," I said, "bad girl." Dean just laughed. "Nah, she's cool. Just protecting our mom, right, Lulu?" Honestly, I wouldn't trust some random auto repair dude either. "No, it's not you. It's just my boyfriend. Or, I guess my ex-boyfriend now. Yeah, I don't know. I guess he made her a little skittish around guys like you." Dean raised his eyebrows a little, but then he pursed his lips and nodded as if he understood, and I appreciated that he didn't ask anything further about it. He told me to go wait on him, that he'd handle everything from here. When I got back to the office, Dean's father, Richard, had already sorted out the bill with the U-Haul folks. "Free and clear," he said. There was nothing else to do but wait for the van to be ready. A TV hanging in the corner was playing a muted episode of Judge Judy. Richard took a seat across from me in the waiting area and petted Lulu while telling me a little about himself and his family. His wife had died a year and a half ago, he said. passed suddenly in her sleep, which is a mercy, I suppose. It had been a tough string of months, but he and his sons were close. They were getting him through it. Lulu seemed to sense his sadness, because she showed more attachment to him than most other male strangers. "I hope you don't mind me speaking out of turn," Richard said as he stroked Lulu's head, "but I'm relieved you have this dog here with you." "Why's that?" "Well, not to scare you, but there have been some incidents." He told me he didn't want me to cause any undue worry, but there had been 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields down the highway over the past year and a half. All the victims were like you, young women traveling alone, Richard said. "So it's good you got this girl here." And he put his face close to Lulu, who licked him on the cheek. "Ah, good girl, such a sweetie." "I mean, I appreciate you giving me a heads up at least," I said. "Sure, and like I said, didn't mean to scare you. Probably nothing." "No, it's nice of you. You guys have all been really nice," I added. "Dean was very helpful." "That's just the wonderful service and dedication you would expect from the world-famous team at Richard & Sons Auto Repair," Richard laughed. "But I do thank you, sincerely." I almost asked if Dean had a girlfriend, as if that weren't a totally crazy and pathetic question to pose to a total stranger. But before I had the chance to embarrass myself, the other son, Abel, shuffled into the office and murmured something to his father. Richard nodded, saying to me, "Well, looks like you're all set." "No paperwork or anything?" "Nope, all taken care of. Get you a receipt for insurance purposes, but otherwise you're good to go. Here, let me walk you and Lulu out." On our way out of the office, I debated the merits of giving Dean my number, trying to balance the pros and cons. Was it better to risk wild embarrassment if I get rejected, versus the regret I might feel if I did nothing? I was so new to the single life again that I didn't know how any of this worked anymore. It turns out the decision was made for me, because Dean was gone when we got to the van. "Dean head off already?" Richard asked. Abel nodded. "Had a date," he said in that whisper quiet voice of his. "Oh, another date. Why am I not surprised?" Of course, I thought. And really, what did I expect? Just because Dean was working at some Nowheresville auto repair shop didn't change the fact that he was still wildly handsome and easy to talk to. If anything, girls probably swooned over the fact that he could take a car apart by hand, peeling off his shirt afterward, his muscles gleaming with sweat, etc., etc. I felt like an idiot. "Well, sure was great to meet you," Richard said. "And so nice to meet you too, Miss Lulu." His son Abel reached into his pocket and dangled the keys out in front of me, while Richard got down and gave Lulu one last head scratch. I took the keys from Abel and smiled. "Thank you," I said. He smiled back, but he didn't break eye contact, and for a split second a shudder passed through my body. Something I can't explain. "Drive safe," he breathed. The back road highway that night was dark. What my sister would call country dark, but I would call horror movie dark. It seemed the smaller highways like this were only busy during the day, because I only saw a car pass by every few minutes or so. Fields of corn along the roadside swayed under a cloud-choked moon. The night air was punctuated by faraway train whistles, which sounded to me more like muffled screams. I don't know if I was just freaked out by the warning Richard had given me, or if there was really something to be said about this stretch of highway, but I kept getting a feeling as if eyes were staring out at me from the fields. I sensed I was driving into the mouth of the beast, already on my way to being digested by the darkness. Up ahead, the cornfields ended and were overtaken by forest, a dense swath of evergreen trees. and the moment we drove past the fields, Lulu started barking. I swear I almost crashed the car. Oh my God! Lulu! Lulu, calm down! She was going crazy, turning her head side to side as she barked at whatever we just passed on the side of the road. Lulu, relax, girl. But I couldn't even say that without my own voice choking up. 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields, Richard had said. My hands felt slippery on the wheel. I'd never been comfortable driving a U-Haul van before, and it didn't help that the darkness seemed to devour the headlamps, so that I could barely see a few feet in front of me down the highway. I tried turning on the radio, got static, and turned the dial, but then thought the better of it and shut it off again. Better to be in silence, just in case. In case what? My mind was going in so many directions, and even saying there was silence would be wrong, because every few minutes Lulu started up again, pawing at the back seat and the windows, barking like crazy and growling. It was like she was fighting a ghost and wanted to break out of the car. I glanced out the windows but could only see darkness on either side of the road. That, along with the shadowed outlines of trees, stumps, power lines, all of which looked like monsters to me. And eventually we entered South Carolina. We passed out of the rural area, and it was only when the bright flood lamps of passing car dealerships and 24-hour fast food places illuminated the inside of the cabin that Lulu fell silent. But even then, for the last 3 hours of the car ride, she never fully relaxed, especially when we passed through the occasional pockets of empty rural areas. She seemed stressed. Occasionally she'd perk up, as if she'd seen someone outside our window, floating along with us. Her body language would stiffen. By now I just let it happen. I told myself she was just tense from traveling. She seemed desperate by the end of the trip. I could tell she was exhausted. She hadn't slept all night. I was exhausted too. Lulu's howls and barks had kept me alert, but it hadn't exactly done well for keeping my eyes on the road. I felt the kind of twitchy panic that usually came from drinking too much coffee, my eyes darting from side to side, feeling like I was about to crash into something any minute. My sister had texted me before she went to bed and told me the key was under the mat. It was around 3 a.m. when I pulled up to the curb outside her house and put the van in park. When I did, Lulu shot up. "Okay, yes, we're here, girl. You can relax now." In the glow of the van's cab, as I reached over to grab my night bag, I could hear Lulu breathing deeply. She was taking fast and muffled breaths, panting. It sounded like she was trying to catch her breath after running. "Hey, chill out," I said as I grabbed my bag and sat up again. "What are you panting for, girl? We're already..." I froze. Lulu was totally still beside me. She was facing the back of the van. Her mouth was closed. Her tongue wasn't hanging out. Her chest wasn't rising and falling. She was calm and focused, breathing slowly and silently. It wasn't her. The breathing wasn't her. It was coming from somewhere in the back of the van. Just then, Lulu showed her teeth and growled. "Oh, okay, girl," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. I was shaking. I could barely feel my body. I was floating outside of it. Let's head on inside now. Come on." I fumbled with the door handle. I almost fell when I stepped out. I tried taking out my phone and dialing 911, but my hand was shaking so bad I couldn't even unlock my phone screen. Lulu hopped out and circled me. She was on high alert. Her head was low and she moved like a predator, keeping close to my legs. I walked backwards with her up the driveway, but she stayed between me and the van, pacing quickly from side to side. I managed to get my phone unlocked. I was about to hit the emergency call button when I heard something move inside the van. A metallic click. The back door, I realized. I'd locked it, but it could still open from the inside. The street was dark, only one lamppost glowing off at the intersection down the road. Everyone in their homes was asleep. I was totally alone. In the darkness, I heard something scrape at the back door from inside the van, then a soft clunk as the door opened. It opened slowly at first, as if a creature inside were checking to see if it were safe. I hit the emergency call button just as the door swung all the way open. 911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency? But I couldn't speak. I was frozen. The door bounced back as it fully opened, and then out fell a naked body, tangled limbs hitting the pavement, a mess of blonde hair shimmering in the dark. When the person rose up again, I almost passed out. It was Dean. Hello? Hello, I said into the phone. I need help. Someone. He was in my van. Please send police to... Lulu barked and jumped forward. Jesus fucking Christ, Dean said, shaking out his limbs. Can someone please tell this fucking dog to shut up? Dean was covered in sweat, wearing only his boxer shorts. He looked sickly and diseased. All fucking night it's just bark, 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 yap, yap, yap. He exhaled and stretched out his arms, and I saw he was holding a knife in his hand. With his free hand, he swiped back the sweaty hair off his forehead. Cooped up in a hot-ass truck for hours under all your useless shit. I had to take off my clothes, it was so damn hot. And I gotta hear that fucking dog barking non-stop? Please, send help, I said into the phone, repeating my sister's address over and over. Please, he's got a knife. Oh, he's got a knife, does he? Oh, boo-hoo. And Dean walked forward, holding the knife out toward Lulu, tossing it casually from hand to hand. Every time I try to make a move, this bitch goes nuts on me. Yap, 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 yap. Dean, please, just... I don't know what you want, but please. You should be thanking me, you know that? He waved the knife from side to side, as if reprimanding me. I'm way out of your league, so the fact that I chose you tonight, it's really an act of charity. Okay, I said. I would have said anything to get him to go away. Okay, I'm sorry. You want the truth? It wasn't even me who wanted you. I thought you were a 6, maybe a 7 at best. But my brother? He thought you looked tasty enough. So I say, okay, fine, sure. I'll get you and bring you back to him. I'm a good brother, aren't I? That's what good brothers do. They do favors. I wanted his first time to be special. No, I know. You're a good brother. I still held the phone up to my ear, hoping the operator could hear me. This all could have been so easy. So fucking easy. Would have been over by now. But no, because Miss Yap 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 over here. He gripped the knife tight, squatting as he stepped forward, his eyes on Lulu. So keep on crying into the phone, but make sure you tell them your dog is dead too, because the bitch deserved it. No! Dean lunged forward, slashing the knife at her. Lulu yelped and flipped to the side as the blade swept across her back, her body scrambling over the pavement. But then it was Dean who screamed, falling back as his knife landed on the ground. Fuck! Jesus Christ! My hand! Even in the darkness, I could see the blood pour from Lulu's back where the blade had sliced her open, but I could also see her spit out a mangled hand onto the pavement, as if it were nothing but a squeaky toy. I'm gonna kill this dog, Dean screamed. Blood poured from the stump at his wrist. With his other hand, he reached down to grab the knife, then turned to face her. But Lulu was already upon him, lunging up in the air, her own blood streaking off the gash in her back as she flew. This time, she aimed for his face. A severed hand, it turns out, is a more than adequate DNA sample. It only took a few days before the police were able to match Dean's DNA with the DNA found on the bodies of the 7 women who were found in the woods down the highway from the auto repair shop. Dean's mugshot showed a guy with a mutilated, torn-up face, bruised and bloody and held together with stitches. When the police had arrived that night outside my sister's house, they had found him half dead on the sidewalk, blood leaking from his neck. As for Lulu and me, I had already carried her inside the house. The police found us on the tile floor of the kitchen, Lulu bleeding out in my lap, unmoving, while I whispered to her, "I love you, girl. I love you so much." It wasn't long before Dean's brother Abel was arrested as an accessory to the crimes. During a news conference a few days later, the police chief said that for the past year and a half, the 2 brothers had been using road traps on the back road highway to cause damage to passing vehicles, forcing them to stop. In most cases, they fixed the cars and that was that. Nothing more than a scam to gain business for their father's shop. But when the driver was a pretty young woman, the 2 used the shop's tow truck to lure the women away to a remote location past the cornfields. DNA samples from at least 4 of the women were found inside the truck. With the last would-be victim, the brothers appeared to have gotten reckless and instead lured her right to the repair shop, said the police chief during the press conference. Had the young woman not been accompanied by her dog, a pit bull mix by the name of Lulu, there's no telling what. I closed my laptop. I didn't want to hear the rest. Later, I saw in an online article a photo of their father Richard shielding his face as reporters surrounded him. There was no evidence he'd been involved in any way. He'd seemed shocked when the police came to the auto shop. I felt bad for him. He seemed like a good man. I couldn't even imagine what he was thinking. The police chief had said the brothers had been committing the assaults and murders for the last year and a half, which means they would have started right after their mother died. The timing made me feel sick. Richard had said his wife's death was from natural causes, that she died peacefully in her sleep. I like to believe that's the case. I like to believe the brothers had waited for their mother to die, and that's the only reason they started their murderous spree right after her funeral. Despite all they did, I really hope, if only for Richard's sake, that they hadn't gotten impatient and done something to their own mother. It was surreal trying to get settled in a new place after all this. I felt like my old life had been years and years ago. My ex did text me once, though, just after he heard the news. "Hope you're okay," the text said. Normally I would have sat for hours, deliberating over how to respond, but now I texted back right away. "I am," I said. I watched 3 dots pop up in the bubble as he was typing something, then they disappeared again. That night, the news ran a segment about Lulu. There was a whole ceremony in her honor. Normally I wouldn't have watched the rest of the coverage of the case. It was already traumatic enough. I was told I would have to testify, that it would be a long process, and I wanted to avoid it as much as I could. But I made sure to watch the news segment on Lulu. A moment of celebration today as Lulu the scrappy pit bull mix gets a hero's welcome outside the East Side Animal Hospital, said the news anchor. So many people had showed up to the animal hospital earlier that afternoon to celebrate Lulu's discharge. The footage held on Lulu's face as she eyed the crowd of police officers, the news crews, the reporters and hospital staff. I was right beside her in the footage, looking just as awkward. "See that, girl?" I said as I watched the coverage with her later that night. Lulu was curled on my lap on the couch as I stroked the long scar on her back, the jagged ridges where the animal doctors had sewn her up again. "That's you and me on the news. See, girl?" Lulu had been sleeping, and now she lifted up her head, drowsy from the commotion of the day. She didn't seem too interested about her 15 minutes of fame. She just sighed and plopped her head right back down again on my stomach, and went back to sleep. When the news was over, I nudged Lulu awake, and after she went outside to pee, the two of us shuffled down the hallway. I led Lulu into the guest bedroom. As I pulled down the covers on the bed, Lulu went to lie down on the hardwood floor in the corner of the room by herself. No, come here, girl. She glanced up at me, one paw on top of the other. I patted the bed. You sleep up here from now. Come on up. She made a soft noise, her tail wagging. Then she hopped up awkwardly on the bed, still a little sore from her wounds. As I shut off the lamp, Lulu nuzzled up against my legs, resting her head on my thigh. Comfy? I asked. She sighed a grumbly, growling purr in response. Get used to it, pretty girl, I said. You've more than earned it.